A Midwestern family vanished in 2001, immediately after reporting a home intruder. 24 years later, police pried open the house's chimney, and what they found inside rewrites everything. One ordinary Friday night, popcorn, a cartoon, parents checking the locks, felt like every other small-town evening until a trembling 911 call turned normal into nightmare. Officers arrived to a warm bowl on the coffee table, a locked bedroom, and a smell that was wrong, like something living had been buried in the heart of the house. An old friend, a sudden $15,000 cash withdrawal, and a second voice caught faintly on the tape suggest this was engineered, not random. Who coached that call? Who walked through the back door? And how could a family disappear from their own locked home, then be found inside the place they trusted most? The popcorn was Michelle's idea. David Hartwell had wanted to turn in early that Friday night. His shift at the nationwide office on Brady Street had run long, 3 claims backlogged from the chaos of the week. But Michelle insisted the kids needed something normal, something to remind them that life continued, even when the world felt upended. So she'd pulled out the air popper, the one they'd received as a wedding gift 12 years ago, and filled the house with the warm, buttery smell of a family movie night. Emma sprawled on the living room carpet with her sketchbook, drawing rockets and planets in purple crayon. The twins, Cole and Charlotte, built a fort from sofa cushions, their laughter high and careless. Michelle settled into her usual spot on the couch, reading glasses perched on her nose as she flipped through the TV guide, searching for something appropriate. September 14, 2001. 3 days after the towers fell. 3 days since the television had shown nothing but smoke and falling bodies and a changed America. David stood in the kitchen doorway watching them. His family. Safe. Accounted for. The motion sensor lights he'd installed last month cast geometric patterns across the backyard through the window above the sink. He'd checked every lock twice before dinner. Front door, back door, basement door, garage. The alarm system's green light blinked steadily on the panel near the mudroom. Everything secure. Everything as it should be. "You're hovering again," Michelle said without looking up. "Just making sure. The doors are locked. The alarm is set. Come sit down." She patted the cushion beside her. The kids picked Shrek. David moved to the couch but couldn't quite relax into it. His body held the coiled tension that had lived in his muscles since he was 12 years old. The night 2 men had kicked in his childhood home's door and held a gun to his mother's head while they ransacked the place. He'd been in his bedroom, paralyzed with fear, listening to his mother's muffled sobs. The police had arrived too late to catch them. They always arrived too late. Emma looked up from her. Drawing. "Daddy, can we get a dog?" "We've talked about this, sweetheart, but a dog would bark if someone tried to break in." Her 9-year-old logic was sound, even if her motivation was purely about wanting a pet. "Emma?" Michelle's tone was gentle but firm. "No one's breaking in." "There were those car break-ins," Emma persisted. "Mrs. Henderson said someone stole her stereo right out of her driveway." David felt his chest tighten. The neighborhood watch meeting last Tuesday had confirmed a string of petty thefts within a 4-block radius. Unlocked cars, mostly, a few garages left open overnight. Nothing violent, nothing that warranted the dread currently pooling in his stomach. "That's why we lock our doors," Michelle said, "and why Daddy installed those very bright lights that make our backyard look like a baseball stadium." Cole emerged from the cushion fort. "I'm thirsty." "Kitchen," Michelle said. "Pour one for your sister, too." The twins thundered toward the kitchen, and David instinctively stood, tracking their movement. Through the doorway, he watched Cole drag a chair to the counter, stretching for the plastic cups in the cabinet. Everything normal. Everything fine. The popcorn bowl sat on the coffee table, still steaming slightly. Michelle had made it exactly the way the kids liked it. Extra butter, light salt. David took a handful, the kernels warm against his palm. "You need to relax," Michelle said quietly. "You've barely slept this week." "The whole country's barely slept this week." "I know, but the kids are watching you. They can tell when you're anxious." He knew she was right. Emma had started checking the locks herself before bed. Charlotte had asked twice this week if bad people were coming to Davenport. 6 years old and already inheriting his fear. Cole and Charlotte returned with their cups of apple juice, sloshing slightly. Michelle started the movie. The DreamWorks logo filled the screen, and Emma abandoned her drawing to curl up on the floor with a pillow. The twins settled back into their fort. For a moment, the room held the particular peace of a Friday evening in a safe house on a tree-lined street in a quiet Iowa neighborhood. David tried to let it sink into his bones, tried to believe it. The movie played. Shrek grumbled about ogres and layers. The kids laughed at the donkey. Michelle's hand found David's, her fingers warm and certain. Outside, the September night deepened. The motion sensor lights flickered on occasionally when wind moved the branches of the oak tree in the backyard, and each time David's pulse jumped before settling. At some point, he couldn't say exactly when, Michelle's grip on his hand loosened. Her head tipped slightly to the side, resting against the couch back. Tired, he thought. It had been a long week for her, too. Roosevelt Elementary had held an assembly about the attacks, and she'd had to explain the unexplainable to a classroom of 8-year-olds. Emma yawned, wide and jaw-cracking. On the screen, Shrek and Donkey were arguing about sleeping arrangements. Cole's eyes had gone heavy-lidded. Charlotte was already asleep in the cushion fort, her small body curled like a comma. David blinked. His own eyelids felt weighted, his thoughts beginning to unspool in that particular way that preceded sleep. Strange. He'd felt wired just minutes ago, too anxious to rest. Now a profound heaviness was spreading through his limbs. Michelle's reading glasses slipped down her nose. She didn't adjust them. The movie played on, but the sound seemed to be coming from very far away. David tried to stand. Something felt wrong. Something felt terribly wrong. But his legs wouldn't cooperate. His muscles had turned to sand. Emma's sketchbook slipped from her fingers, her head lowered slowly to the pillow, purple crayon still clutched in one hand. David's vision swam. The room tilted. He reached for Michelle, his hand moving as if through water, and found her wrist. Her pulse was there, slow and steady, but she didn't respond to his touch, didn't open her eyes. The popcorn. The thought arrived clear and sharp through the fog now filling his mind. Something in the popcorn. He tried to call out, to warn them, but his tongue was thick and useless in his mouth. Across the room, Emma's breathing had gone deep and rhythmic. The twins hadn't moved. Michelle's hand lay limp in his. Footsteps. David heard them distantly, coming from somewhere else in the house. Not the children's light patter. Heavier, adult. A figure moved into the doorway between the kitchen and living room, a man, familiar in a way David's drugged mind couldn't quite grasp. The figure stood there, watching them, and in his hand was something that gleamed dully in the television's flickering light. David tried to focus, tried to see, tried to understand. The man stepped closer, and David's last clear thought before the darkness took him was of Emma's drawing, the one she'd been working on when this normal Friday evening began. A house with 4 stick figures and a chimney with exaggerated smoke curling toward a purple sky. Officer Patricia Reese had been on the Davenport force for 6 years, and she'd learned to trust her instincts. The call had come through dispatch at 11:43 p.m. Possible home invasion, family barricaded in bedroom, intruder possibly fled. Routine enough, except for the edge in the dispatcher's voice when she relayed it. "Something's off about this one," Teresa Moss had said. "The husband sounds scared, but also controlled, like he's reading from a script." Patricia and her partner, Officer Mike Chen, had made the drive to Kirkwood Boulevard in 8 minutes, lights running but no siren, no need to announce their arrival if someone was still inside. The neighborhood was one of Davenport's older sections, tree-lined and respectable, the kind of place where people knew their neighbors and left their porches lit. The Hartwell house stood out immediately. Every window blazed with light. The motion sensors David Hartwell had installed bathed the backyard in white glare. It looked like a house trying to keep the darkness at bay. Patricia approached the front door, Mike covering. Unlocked. She pushed it open. "Police, Mr. Hartwell?" Silence. They moved inside, weapons drawn, clearing rooms with practiced efficiency. Living room, empty but lived in. A bowl of popcorn on the coffee table. TV still on, some animated movie frozen on the DVD menu screen. A pair of reading glasses on the sofa arm. A child's sketchbook and crayons scattered on the floor. Kitchen. The back door hung open, cool night air spilling in. Fresh tool marks scored the door frame near the lock, forced entry. A drawer hung askew, its contents dumped across the linoleum floor. Batteries, twist ties, birthday candles, rubber bands. The randomness of it struck Patricia as strange. "Looks like they trashed a junk drawer and left," Mike said. "What kind of burglar?" "Upstairs," Patricia cut him off. Something in the stillness of the house made her skin prickle. They climbed the stairs, the wood creaking under their boots. 3 bedrooms, 1 bathroom. The children's rooms were empty, beds neatly made, nightlights glowing. At the end of the hall, the master bedroom door was closed. Patricia tried the handle. Locked. "Mr. Hartwell? This is the police. Are you in there?" Nothing. Not a sound. Not a whisper. Mike tested his shoulder against the door. Old house, old lock, but solid construction. "We could kick it." Patricia nodded. She'd run the timeline in her head. David Hartwell's 911 call had ended at 11:47 p.m. They'd arrived at 11:55 p.m. 12 minutes from call's end to entry. 12 minutes for a family to vanish. Mike threw his weight against the door. Once, twice. On the third impact, the old lock gave way with a splintering crack. They pushed the door open and froze at the sight that met them. The bedroom lit only by the glow from the hallway. Bedclothes rumpled, and 2 figures slumped where they'd fallen. The room unnaturally still, as if sound itself had been muffled. The morning sun cuts through the September haze, turning Kirkwood Boulevard into a corridor of flashing red and blue. The Hartwell house has been transformed overnight from a suburban home into something else. A monument to questions nobody can answer. Susan Warwick's Honda shudders to a stop 3 houses down. She couldn't get closer. Patrol cars block both ends of the street, and a news van from KWQC-TV is already setting up on the corner. Through her windshield, she can see the yellow crime scene tape strung across the porch where Emma played hopscotch just last weekend, where Cole learned to ride his bike without training wheels, where Charlotte insisted on watering Michelle's petunias every evening. She sits, gripping the steering wheel, watching her breath fog the glass. The dispatcher had been kind, but firm. "Family members need to come to the scene. There's been a development." "No, ma'am, I can't provide details over the phone." The walk from her car feels infinite. Each step carries her closer to confirmation of something her body already knows. Officer Patricia Reese meets her at the tape line, the same officer who'd taken Susan's call yesterday morning when Michelle hadn't shown up for their regular Sunday brunch. "Miss Warwick?" Reese's voice carries the weight of someone who hasn't slept. "Detective Voss is coordinating inside. He'll want to speak with you." "Are they—" Susan can't finish the question, can't make the words real. "We need someone to help us understand the family's routines, what was normal for them." Inside, the house looks violated. Men and women in latex gloves move through rooms Susan knows intimately. The kitchen where Michelle tested new recipes, the living room where the kids built blanket forts. Everything appears exactly as it should be, but transformed by what's missing, by who's missing. A bowl sits on the coffee table, kernels of unpopped corn settled at the bottom like small accusations. The TV guide lies open, Michelle's reading glasses resting on the sofa arm as if she'd only just set them down. Susan reaches for them before Reese gently catches her wrist. I'm sorry. We can't let anyone touch anything yet. Those are Michelle's. She's blind without them. Wherever they are, she needs... Susan's voice cracks. The absurdity of the statement lands like a physical blow. Detective James Voss emerges from the stairwell, a man in his 40s with the bearing of someone who's seen too much. His tie is already loosened, though it's barely 9 in the morning. He extends his hand and Susan takes it, grateful for something solid to anchor to. Miss Warwick, I'm Detective Voss. I know this is difficult, but I need to ask you some questions about your sister's family, about David specifically. They move to the kitchen, where someone has already documented the ransacked junk drawer. Twist ties and rubber bands litter the linoleum. Susan catalogs the wrongness of it. Michelle kept that drawer organized, labeled even. She'd made a joke about it last week, how David teased her for alphabetizing batteries. David called 911 at 11:43 last night. Voss begins, consulting his notes. He reported an intruder in the house, said his whole family was with him in the bedroom, safe. The call lasted 4 minutes. Our officers arrived at 11:55, 12 minutes later. The house was empty. Susan lowers herself into one of the kitchen chairs, the same chairs where she'd shared coffee with Michelle 1,000 times. That's not possible. They wouldn't just leave. Michelle had school this morning. Emma had a dentist appointment. They had... She stops. Had. The past tense already creeping in. Tell me about David's anxiety, Voss says. Other family members mentioned he was especially vigilant about home security. Susan nods slowly. He's been worse since those car break-ins last month. He installed new motion lights, checked all the locks twice every night. Michelle said he'd wake her up sometimes, convinced he heard something. She looks up sharply. But David wouldn't make this up. If he called 911, there was someone here. We believe there was. Voss gestures toward the back door, where crime scene techs are photographing fresh tool marks. The door was forced. Someone broke in, or made it look that way. What I'm trying to understand is what happened in those 12 minutes. How a family of 5 disappears from a locked bedroom. The word locked sends ice through Susan's chest. What do you mean, locked? The master bedroom door was secured from the inside when our officers arrived. They had to force it. The room was empty. Window painted shut. Forensics confirms it hasn't been opened in years. No other exits. He meets her eyes. It's physically impossible, Ms. Warwick, but it happened. Susan's mind races through explanations, each more desperate than the last. Could they have hidden somewhere? The basement? The attic? We've searched every inch, multiple times. Voss's frustration bleeds through his professional composure. I've got 24 officers combing the neighborhood, bloodhounds tracking scents, FBI's flying in to assist because of the timing. He doesn't say it, but she hears it. Because a family vanishing 3 days after 9/11 triggers protocols, fears, possibilities too terrible to name aloud. A younger detective appears in the doorway. Sir, the forensics team found something upstairs, in Emma's room. They climb the stairs, Susan's hand trailing along the banister where small fingerprints still mark the white paint. Emma's bedroom is exactly as Susan remembers from her last visit. Art supplies scattered across the desk. A half-finished drawing of the family home pinned above the bed. In the sketch, 4 stick figures stand in front of the house, smiling. Purple smoke curls from the chimney. This drawing, the forensic tech says, pointing. The mother's sister mentioned the girl was always sketching. Can you confirm this is Emma's work? Susan nods, throat tight. She wanted to be an artist. Michelle was going to sign her up for classes at the community center this fall. The tech makes a note, photographs the drawing from multiple angles. Behind them, Voss is on his phone, coordinating with the FBI field office. Susan catches fragments. Family of 5, no signs of struggle, vehicle still in the driveway. She moves to the window, looking out over the backyard where the kids played yesterday, where they should be playing right now, on this ordinary Sunday morning. The grass needs mowing. David's baseball mitt sits abandoned near the fence. Ms. Warwick. Voss joins her at the window. I need you to think very carefully. Had David mentioned anyone unusual coming around? Old friends reconnecting, strangers asking questions. Anyone at all who seemed out of place. Susan forces herself to concentrate, to push through the fog of panic. Michelle mentioned David had an old college roommate reach out last month, someone he hadn't seen in years. I don't think I caught the name. She said the guy was going through a rough patch, needed a place to stay for a few weeks. Voss goes very still. And did he stay with them? I don't know. Michelle said David was considering it, but she had reservations. She thought. Susan stops, the memory sharpening. She thought the timing was strange. After all those years, why reach out now? But David felt guilty. Said the guy had helped him through some hard times in college. I need that name, Voss says urgently, already signaling another detective. Anything else your sister mentioned about this person? What they looked like? Where they were calling from? Anything. But Susan is staring at the backyard again, at something the others haven't noticed. The gates open. 3 heads turn to follow her gaze. The wooden gate that leads from the backyard to the alley beyond stands ajar, swaying slightly in the morning breeze. David always kept that locked, Susan says. Always. It was one of his rules, gate locked, back door deadbolted, motion lights armed. He was obsessive about it. An officer is dispatched to check the alley. Within minutes he's calling back. Fresh tire tracks in the gravel, recent enough that last night's dew hasn't settled the dust. The tracks lead away from the house, toward the service road behind the subdivision. Voss orchestrates the response with controlled urgency. Get casts of those tracks, canvass the alley, check traffic cameras on the service road approach. The house fills with more personnel, each arrival adding to the surreal transformation of Michelle's careful home into a command center for the incomprehensible. By noon, Susan has repeated everything she knows 3 times to 3 different investigators. The FBI agents are professional but relentless, drilling into family finances, David's work, Michelle's colleagues, the children's activities. Looking for the fracture point, the vulnerability that might explain the impossible. Your brother-in-law made a $15,000 cash withdrawal on August 22nd, an agent named Patterson tells her. That strike you as normal? Susan shakes her head. David was careful with money, grew up poor, always worried about having enough. He wouldn't take out that kind of cash unless someone needed it. Unless someone he trusted had convinced him. The college roommate. The man from David's past who appeared at exactly the wrong moment. She watches them work, these professionals who deal in evidence and probability. They photograph Michelle's purse, still hanging on its hook, wallet intact. They document David's blood pressure medication, yesterday's dose still in the organizer. They fingerprint the back door, the kitchen drawer, the bedroom doorknob. But Susan keeps returning to the detail Voss mentioned earlier, the one that doesn't fit the careful staging of a home invasion. The popcorn was still warm when officers arrived. Someone made that popcorn for the family. Someone sat with them, perhaps watched them eat it. Then somehow, in 12 minutes, made them all disappear. Outside, the media presence is growing. Susan can hear the news anchors through the open windows, already crafting narratives. Mystery in the Midwest. Family vanishes after 911 call. Post 9/11 America gripped by new fear. They don't know yet about the locked room, the painted window, the 12-minute black hole that swallowed them whole. The bloodhound sat on its haunches in the middle of the Hartwell backyard and whined. Detective James Voss watched the handler, a stocky woman from the Scott County K-9 unit named Brenda Kowalski, crouch beside the animal, examining the patch of grass where the scent trail had simply stopped. Not faded, not confused by competing odors or water or pavement, just gone. It's like they flew, Kowalski said, standing and wiping dirt from her knees. The September morning was clear and cool, the air sharp enough to carry voices from the street where news vans idled. Or vanished into thin air. Voss said nothing. He'd already heard variations of that phrase 17 times this week. From FBI agents, from patrol officers, from the reporters who shouted questions whenever he emerged from the house. The Hartwell family had become a story about impossibility. A locked room, a sealed window, and now a scent that terminated in the middle of an ordinary suburban lawn. "Where'd the trail start?" he asked. Kowalski pointed toward the back door, the one with fresh tool marks on the frame. "Right there. Strong trail. All 4 family members plus another individual we haven't identified. The unknown scent moves through the kitchen, up the stairs, into the master bedroom. Then back down, through the hall, and out here." She gestured at the grass. And then nothing. Voss walked to the spot where the dog had lost the trail. The lawn showed no disturbance. No footprints, no drag marks, no indication that 5 people had stood here 5 nights ago. He knelt and touched the grass with his fingertips, as if texture might reveal what his eyes could not. 30 yards away, volunteers in neon safety vests combed the tree line that separated the Hartwell property from the neighboring yards. Their voices carried across the morning, calling for Emma, for Cole, for Charlotte, names spoken into empty air. Could the trail continue somewhere else? Voss asked. If they were carried? Put in a vehicle? That's the thing. Kowalski scratched the dog's ears. We walked the entire perimeter, both sides of the block, the alley where you found tire tracks. Magnus here hit nothing. It's like they were standing in this exact spot and then ceased to exist. The dog looked up at Voss with liquid brown eyes, as if apologizing for the limits of biology. Voss stood and surveyed the yard, 40 feet from the back door to the chain-link fence. A child swing set in the corner, one swing still moving slightly in the breeze. A garden shed painted barn red, a neat rectangle of vegetable garden where tomato plants drooped on their stakes. David Hartwell's world, small and contained, where he'd installed motion sensor lights and checked the locks 3 times before bed. Run it again, Voss said. We've run it 4 times. Then make it 5. Kowalski sighed but gave the command. Magnus circled the yard, nose working methodically across the grass. The same result. The same mournful whine at the same spot. Voss's radio crackled. Detective, you're needed at the front. We've got a witness. The witness was Dolores Chen, 76, who lived 2 doors down on Kirkwood Boulevard. She stood on the sidewalk, clutching a casserole dish wrapped in aluminum foil, her white cardigan buttoned despite the warming day. Officer Patricia Reese stood beside her, notebook ready. Mrs. Chen, Voss said, I understand you saw something the night the Hartwells disappeared. I already told this young lady, Dolores gestured at Reese. I saw the van. Voss exchanged a glance with Reese, who gave a small nod. New information. Tell me about the van, please. It was parked right there. Dolores pointed to a spot directly across from the Hartwell house. White van. Or maybe cream-colored. One of those utility vans, you know, like plumbers drive. It was there when I took my medication at 11:30. I always take my pills at 11:30 and look out the front window. Did you see anyone near the van? Any markings on it? No markings that I remember, and I didn't see a person. Exactly. Dolores frowned, concentrating. But I saw the inside light come on, like someone opened the door. That was around 11:40, I think. Just a flash of light. Then it went dark. 11:40. 3 minutes before David Hartwell's 911 call. How long was the van there? I don't know. I went to bed after my program ended at midnight. It was gone in the morning when I got my newspaper. Voss felt the familiar flutter in his chest that accompanied any lead, however thin. Would you recognize the van if you saw it again? I don't know, dear. It was just a white van. There must be 1,000 white vans in Davenport. Reese was already writing. Voss knew the drill. Canvass every auto shop, every rental company, every business that owned or leased utility vehicles. Check traffic cameras on the routes leading away from Kirkwood Boulevard. It would take days and probably lead nowhere, but it was something. Mrs. Chen, Did you notice anything else unusual that night? Any other vehicles? People walking? Not that I remember. She shifted the casserole dish in her hands. I made this for Michelle's sister. Susan, is it? I thought she might need... Her voice caught. I thought someone should bring food. That's very kind, Voss said gently. Officer Reese will take you to the command post. Susan's there now. After Dolores shuffled away with Reese, Voss stood on the sidewalk and studied the spot where the van had allegedly been parked, directly across from the Hartwell house. A perfect vantage point to watch the front door, the driveway, the upstairs windows. His phone buzzed. The caller ID showed FBI Special Agent Marcus Webb. Voss? Detective, we've got something on the financial angle. Webb's voice was clipped, efficient. That $15,000 withdrawal David Hartwell made on August 22nd? It wasn't a bank transfer or check. He went into the downtown Davenport branch of Wells Fargo and withdrew it in cash. The teller remembers him because of the amount. Did she say how he seemed? Nervous, kept looking at his watch. When she asked if he wanted a cashier's check instead, he said no, it had to be cash. He put it in a manila envelope and left. $15,000 in cash. Either payment for something David didn't want a paper trail for, or money given under duress. Voss thought of Susan's comment about David's old college roommate, the one who'd supposedly fallen on hard times. We're tracking down this Eric Rains, Webb continued, the roommate. Last known address is Portland, Oregon, but it's from 8 years ago. No credit activity, no tax returns filed since 1999. The guy's essentially a ghost. Keep looking, Voss said, and pull anything you can find on their college years. Who else was in their circle? Who might have known David well enough to stay in his house? Already on it. I'll update you this afternoon. Voss ended the call and walked back toward the house. The front lawn was now dotted with searchers taking a break, drinking from water bottles volunteers had distributed. The morning sun glinted off the upstairs windows, behind one of which the Hartwell family had supposedly locked themselves in a room they'd never left. Susan Warwick emerged from the house, trailed by a female FBI agent. Susan's face was drawn, her eyes red-rimmed. She'd been up all night, Voss knew, making phone calls and sorting through family photographs to help investigators build a timeline. Detective? Susan approached him with the determined stride of someone running on willpower alone. The FBI showed me the enhanced audio, the 911 call. Voss tensed. The audio techs had been working on isolating background sounds, but he hadn't expected results this quickly. What did they find? Nothing conclusive, but they said there might be. Susan's voice wavered. They said there might be another person breathing in the room, very faint. They're not certain. Another person in the locked bedroom, directing David's words perhaps, or holding a weapon while David performed the script of his family's disappearance. We're pursuing every angle, Voss said, knowing it sounded hollow. Are you? Susan's control finally cracked. Because from where I'm standing, you have no idea what happened. My sister and her children vanished from a locked room, and the best you can tell me is that a dog lost their scent in the backyard, and maybe there was a white van. Susan, they didn't just disappear, Detective. Someone took them. Someone planned this. And that someone is still out there, while you're chasing shadows. She was right, and they both knew it. But before Voss could respond, Officer Mike Chen jogged across the lawn, his radio squawking. Detective, we've got something. The search team found an item in the storm drain 2 blocks east. What kind of item? Chen's expression was grim. A child's sneaker, pink, size 3. The mother at the command post, Mrs. Warwick. She confirmed Emma Hartwell has a pair that matches. The world seemed to tilt slightly. A shoe. The first physical evidence that the children had been outside the house, moving through the neighborhood while their scent trail vanished and their bedroom sat empty. Bag it, Voss said, and extend the search grid 5 blocks in every direction from that storm drain. Susan had heard. She stood very still, her hands clasped in front of her like she was praying. Just one shoe? Just one, Chen confirmed, which meant Emma had been wearing it when she left the house and lost it, or had it taken from her, sometime during the 12 minutes between David's call and the police arrival. A child moving through the dark streets of Davenport, one foot bare, the other still shod, an image that made Voss's stomach drop. The heat came first to the attic, then worked its way down. By mid-July 2025, the Hartwell house, though nobody called it that anymore, had become a kiln. The Victorians' thick walls and high ceilings, designed to trap cool air in Iowa's humid summers, now held the temperature like a grudge. Outside, the lawn turned from green to straw-colored in 5 days. The maple trees along Kirkwood Boulevard drooped their branches toward the sidewalk, leaves curling inward. Inside, Megan Brennan stood in front of the oscillating fan in the living room, letting it blow her hair back from her face. 23 months they'd owned the house, and she still loved it. The crown molding, the pocket doors, the original hardwood floors that creaked in familiar places. She'd researched every architectural detail before they'd made the offer. She'd researched other things too. "It's worse today," Derek called from the kitchen. "Can you smell it?" Megan moved away from the fan and took a breath through her nose. There it was, organic, faintly sweet, definitely wrong. Like garbage left too long in summer heat, but deeper somehow, more persistent. "Maybe it's just the temperature," she said, though she knew better. Derek appeared in the doorway, holding a can of air freshener, like a weapon. He was shirtless, his project manager practicality reduced to simple survival. "I've had 3 different HVAC guys here. They've checked everything twice. There's no dead raccoon in the ductwork, no backed-up sewage line, no mystery mold colony. One guy said old houses just smell sometimes. Maybe he's right." "You don't believe that?" Derek sprayed a cloud of artificial lavender toward the ceiling. "You've been walking around sniffing corners for a week." He wasn't wrong. Megan had traced the smell's perimeter like a detective, noting where it grew stronger, near the old fireplace in the living room, oddly enough, though they'd never used it. The previous owners had converted to central heating decades ago. The chimney sweep inspection hadn't even been on their radar when they'd bought the place. "It's probably the chimney," Derek continued. "Bird nest or something died up there. I should have listened when the inspector said we should get it checked." Megan walked to the fireplace and crouched down. The opening was sealed with a decorative screen they'd left in place when they'd moved in. She could see soot stains on the brick interior, dark streaks that disappeared upward into shadow. The smell was definitely stronger here. "When did it start?" she asked. "The heat wave. Maybe 5 days ago?" Derek tossed the air freshener onto the coffee table, the same spot, though neither of them knew it, where a bowl of popcorn had once sat. "I'm calling someone today. I don't care what it costs. A chimney sweep. Unless you have a better idea." Megan stood and moved to the window, looking out at Kirkwood Boulevard's heat-shimmer distortions. Across the street, the Chen family's sprinkler system threw rainbows across their lawn. Normal life, continuing. She'd interviewed enough people for enough stories to know that normal life was where the worst things often happened. Derek didn't know she'd bought the house partly because of its history. He knew about the disappearance. You couldn't buy property in Davenport without hearing the stories. But he thought her interest was casual. Journalists' curiosity. She'd let him think that. The truth was more complicated. Megan had read every article, every forum post, every wild theory about the Hartwell family. She'd even found the original 911 call on a true crime website, though she'd only listened once. David Hartwell's controlled panic had kept her awake that night. His whispered observations about drawers opening, about hearing someone leave. 23 years, and nobody knew where they'd gone. "I'll call the chimney guy," Derek said. "Carl Whitmore. Old guy who came recommended on that neighborhood forum you're always reading. Okay. You're doing it again. Megan turned from the window. Doing what? That thing where you're not really here. Derek's face had the patient frustration she'd been seeing more often lately. You're thinking about them. The family. I'm thinking about the smell. Right. He picked up his phone from the table, scrolled for a moment. Found him. I'm calling now before I lose my nerve. Derek stepped into the hallway for better reception, his voice fading to a murmur. Megan returned her attention to the fireplace. She'd stood here before, many times, usually late at night when Derek was asleep. Stood here and tried to imagine what the Hartwells had been doing in those final hours. The police reports, obtained through FOIA requests that Derek didn't know about, described the scene. The popcorn bowl. The TV guide opened to that night's programming. Michelle's reading glasses on the sofa. All of it suggesting an ordinary Friday night interrupted. Then, nothing. Just absence. He can come tomorrow, Derek said, returning. 2 o'clock. Says he's been doing this for 40 years, so if there's something dead up there, he's seen worse. Tomorrow, Megan echoed. You okay? You look pale. She was pale. The smell, the heat, the accumulated weight of sleeping in a house where a family had vanished. It was all catching up. I'm fine, just ready for this to be solved. It's a dead animal, Meg, not a mystery. But that was where they differed. For Derek, problems had practical solutions. For Megan, every problem hid a deeper story, and every story had a truth that refused to stay buried. That night, she dreamed about chimneys, dark vertical spaces that went up and up, their brick walls narrowing toward distant sky. In the dream, she climbed inside and looked upward, seeing not light but shadow, thick, accumulated shadow that blocked the opening. When she woke, sweating in the 3 a.m. heat, Derek's breathing steady beside her, she thought about the Hartwell children. Emma, 9, the twins, 6, small enough to fit into tight spaces, small enough to disappear completely. She went downstairs in her nightshirt, moving quietly through the dark house. The smell was stronger at night, or perhaps just more noticeable without daylight's distractions. She stood in front of the fireplace again, that same magnetic pull. Where did you go? She whispered to the empty room. The house offered no answer. It never did. But Megan had learned over years of investigative work that houses kept secrets better than people. They were patient. They waited. Tomorrow, she thought. Tomorrow the chimney sweep would come, and maybe the smell would have a simple explanation. A raccoon, a bird, something ordinary that died in an ordinary way. But standing there in the dark, with the smell coating the back of her throat and the old bricks radiating the day's stored heat, Megan felt the certainty that had made her a good journalist. Something was wrong in this house, had always been wrong. And tomorrow, they were going to find out what. She just didn't know yet that what they found would have been there all along, waiting in the vertical dark, preserved in the heart of the house. For 23 years, 8 months, and 3 days. The smell was stronger because the heat wave had accelerated decomposition that had been frozen in time. Tomorrow, Carl Whitmore would arrive with his brushes and his inspection camera. Tomorrow, the Hartwell family would finally be found. But tonight, Megan stood in the dark and breathed in the truth without knowing what it meant, while upstairs, Derek slept soundly and dreamed of nothing at all. Carl Whitmore had been sweeping chimneys for 32 years, ever since his uncle taught him the trade in the early 90s. He'd seen everything: raccoon families, bird carcasses stacked 3 deep, old Christmas stockings that had fallen and blocked flues for decades. Once, in a mansion on Brady Street, he'd extracted a whole frozen turkey someone had apparently tried to hide from the health inspector in 1987. Nothing surprised him anymore. But the smell coming from the Brennan fireplace made him pause. "When's the last time this was used?" he asked Megan, setting his canvas tool bag on the hearth. The fireplace was beautiful, original brick from the 1920s, with an ornate iron grate and a mantel carved from walnut, the kind of feature that added 10,000 to a home's value, if you could get it working again. The previous owners had it sealed, Megan said. She stood in the living room doorway, arms crossed, watching him work. We've never used it. The whole system was converted to central heating back in the 80s, I think. Carl nodded, kneeling to peer up the flue with his flashlight. Darkness swallowed the beam after about 6 feet. You getting a smell from anywhere else? Attic, crawl space? Just here. It's worse when it's hot. That tracks. He pulled his inspection camera from the bag, a fiber optic cable with a light and lens at the tip, connected to a small monitor. Heat rises, pushes air up and out. If something died up there, the smell would intensify on hot days. Let's see what we've got. Derek appeared from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a dish towel. How long will this take? Depends on what I find. Could be 10 minutes, could be all afternoon. Carl fed the camera line into the flue, watching the monitor as the lens ascended through the brick shaft. Soot and creosote coated the walls, decades of accumulated residue from when the fireplace had been active. Spider webs stretched across the opening like gossamer curtains. The cable climbed. 5 feet, 7, 9. At 12 feet, the camera met resistance. There we go, Carl muttered. On the monitor, something pale and fibrous blocked the flue almost completely. The material pressed against the lens, obscuring detail. Definitely an obstruction. Let me get a better angle. He adjusted the camera, tilting it slightly. The pale material shifted in the LED light. Not fur, not feathers, too uniform, almost like fabric? What is it? Megan had moved closer, trying to see the screen. Hard to say yet. Could be old insulation someone stuffed up there. Could be newspaper, rags. People used to block chimneys all kinds of ways when they stopped using them. But even as he said it, Carl felt the first whisper of unease. The smell was stronger now with the flue opened, and it wasn't the dry, musty scent of old cloth. It was organic, wet. He retracted the camera and reached for his chimney rods. Long, flexible fiberglass poles that could be screwed together to extend 30 feet or more. He attached a circular brush to the first rod, the kind designed to break up creosote and obstructions. I'm going to try to dislodge it, he said. Might make a mess, so you'll want to step back. Megan and Derek retreated to the hallway as Carl fed the rod up the chimney, feeling for the blockage. It took 3 extensions, about 15 feet, before the brush met the obstruction. He pushed, gently at first, testing its density. Solid, heavy. He pushed harder, working the brush in small circles. The material resisted, then shifted slightly with a sound that made Carl's stomach tighten. Not the rustle of fabric or the crackle of dried leaves. Something denser, heavier. A smell rolled down the chimney, thick, cloying, unmistakable. Death. Carl had smelled it before, the few times he'd found large animals. A possum, once a feral cat. But this was different, stronger, old but recently disturbed, like opening a crypt that had been sealed for years. Jesus, Derek said from the hallway, covering his nose. Carl set his jaw and pushed the rod harder, working the brush against the obstruction. Something gave way with a wet, tearing sound. A cascade of debris tumbled down the flue, soot, brick fragments, and something else. He pulled the rod free and stepped back as the material hit the fireplace grate. Black soot, yes. Chunks of degraded mortar, yes. And tangled among it, a scrap of cloth, faded, water-damaged, but still recognizable. Blue fabric, printed with cartoon images. Carl's hands started to shake. What is that? Megan's voice was very quiet. He knelt, training his flashlight on the fabric. It was definitely cloth, cotton, maybe flannel, pajamas, child-sized. The cartoon characters were barely visible under the grime, but he could make out a yellow rocket ship, a smiling moon. Call the police, Carl said. His voice sounded far away, even to himself. What? Derek stepped into the room. Why? Call them, now. Carl stood, backing away from the fireplace. Don't touch anything, just call them. Megan was already moving toward the phone, her face pale. Oh God, is it? I don't know what it is, Carl said, though that was a lie. He'd been sweeping chimneys in Davenport long enough to know this house, to know its history. The Hartwell place. Everyone in the trade knew it. Some guys wouldn't even take the job, said the house was cursed. Derek was staring at the scrap of fabric on the grate. That's not from an animal. No. Carl's hand found his cell phone. No, it's not. Megan's voice drifted from the kitchen, shaky and formal as she spoke to the 911 dispatcher. Carl moved to the fireplace one more time, shining his light up the flue. The obstruction was still there, massive and dark. The rod had only dislodged the outer layer. His light caught something else among the debris on the grate. He leaned closer, not touching, barely breathing. A bone. Small, pale, unmistakable in its shape. He closed his eyes. 32 years in this business, and he'd never found anything like this. Never wanted to. But he'd heard the stories. Every tradesman in Davenport had. The family that vanished in 2001, right after 9/11. The locked bedroom. The impossible disappearance. The theories that had circulated for years. Witness protection, cult abduction, murder-suicide in a hidden location. No one had ever suggested they'd simply looked in the wrong direction. Derek was on his phone now, too, his voice tight with shock as he called someone. A friend, maybe, or a family member. Megan stood in the kitchen doorway, her arms wrapped around herself, staring at Carl with wide, horrified eyes. How long? She whispered. How long have they been? I don't know, Carl said. But he did know. 24 years. 24 years of searches, of vigils, of neighbors walking past this house, wondering what had happened to the perfect family who'd lived here. 24 years of police theories and FBI investigations and cold case forums on the internet. And all that time, the Hartwells had been home, right here in the heart of their house, sealed in the darkness, waiting. Sirens rose in the distance, growing closer. Carl stood in the living room where the family had once watched television, where they'd eaten popcorn and felt safe, and he stared at the chimney that had kept their secret for nearly a quarter century. The smell was overwhelming now, unavoidable. The scent of truth finally rising after years of compression in the dark. He thought about all the times he'd driven past this house, seen the for sale signs come and go, watched new families move in and out. He thought about how close he'd come to refusing this job, how he'd almost told Derek Brennan to find someone else because of the house's reputation. The sirens screamed closer, and Carl Whitmore realized he would never forget this day, this moment, this terrible discovery. Some things, once found, could never be unknown. The medical examiner's van pulled away from the Hartwell house at 4:17 a.m., its red taillights fading into the humid darkness. 4 body bags, sealed and tagged, lay strapped inside. The street had transformed into a stage of strobing blues and reds. Neighbors in bathrobes clustered behind the police tape, whispering theories that couldn't begin to approximate the truth. Megan Brennan sat in the back of a patrol car, Derek beside her, both wrapped in shock blankets despite the heat. She'd stopped shivering an hour ago, but her hands still trembled when she tried to lift the water bottle an officer had given her. Through the window, she watched the forensics team emerge from her house, their house, carrying equipment cases and evidence bags. Mrs. Brennan? Detective Sarah Mills slid into the front seat, turning to face them. She was 40-something, with graying blonde hair pulled back severely, and eyes that had clearly witnessed too many scenes like this. I know this has been traumatic. We'll need formal statements, but that can wait until morning. Is there somewhere you can stay tonight? Derek answered, his voice hollow. My brother's place in Bettendorf. Good. Mills made a note. The house is going to be a crime scene for several days, possibly weeks. Megan found her voice, though it sounded foreign to her own ears. They were there the whole time. It wasn't a question, but Mills treated it like one. We'll know more after the medical examiner completes the autopsy. But yes, preliminary assessment suggests the remains have been in the chimney structure for an extended period. Given the location and condition, we're treating this as a recovery of the Hartwell family. 24 years, Derek said. He turned to Megan, and she saw something new in his expression. Not anger, not quite accusation, but a terrible recognition. You knew this house had a history. You researched it. Is this what you were hoping for? Derek, did you want this? To be part of the story? Mills cleared her throat. Mr. Brennan, your wife couldn't have known. She bought 3 books about the case. Derek's voice cracked. I found them in her office, hidden behind the other books. She knew exactly what happened here, and she bought the house anyway. Megan couldn't defend herself because he was right. She'd told herself it was journalistic curiosity, professional interest, but somewhere deeper she'd been drawn to the mystery, to the idea of living inside an unsolved puzzle. Now 4 people were dead in her chimney, and her romantic notions felt obscene. I need air. Derek pushed out of the patrol car, walking toward Mills' partner without looking back. Mills studied Megan with something that might have been sympathy. For what it's worth, this would have been discovered eventually. The house was scheduled for renovation. Better now than in another 5 years. There's nothing better about this. No, Mills agreed. There's not. Through the window, Megan watched the forensics coordinator, a tall man with silver hair, approach Mills's vehicle. The detective stepped out, leaving Megan alone with her thoughts and the police radio's static chatter. She replayed the last 6 hours in fragments, Carl Whitmore's camera revealing the obstruction, his careful work with the rods, that first piece of fabric tumbling into the fireplace. She'd known immediately, had felt it in her gut before her brain could process the cartoon. Rocket ships printed on the cloth. The smell that had seemed like rot and summer heat suddenly took on specificity. Human decomposition, unmistakable once you knew. Carl had stumbled backward, his face gray. Derek had looked into the fireplace, seen the small bone among the soot, and said, "Oh God, oh Jesus Christ." And Megan, the journalist, had grabbed her phone and dialed 911, her voice steady and professional even as her world tilted. "This is Megan Brennan at 4156 Kirkwood Boulevard. We found human remains in our chimney. I think it's the Hartwell family." The dispatcher had made her repeat it twice. Mills returned with the forensics coordinator. He crouched beside the patrol car, speaking through the open door. "Mrs. Brennan, I'm Dr. Philip Roth with the State Crime Lab. I need to ask you some questions about the chimney." Megan nodded. "Has it been used at all since you moved in?" "No. It was sealed when we bought the house. The previous owners had it inspected in 2019 and decided not to use it. Too old, potential hazard." "And Mr. Whitmore today, had he ever inspected it before?" "No. First time. We only called because of the smell." Roth exchanged a look with Mills. The smell would have been accelerated by the heat wave. July in Iowa, temperatures hitting triple digits. It would have intensified decomposition that had been largely arrested by the chimney's conditions. "Arrested?" Megan heard herself ask. "You mean they were preserved?" "In a sense. The chimney created an environment, dry, limited oxygen, relatively stable temperature until recently. Similar to natural mummification." He paused. "I'm telling you this because it's going to come out in the media analysis, and you should hear it first. The positioning of the remains suggests they were placed very carefully. This wasn't accidental. Someone used that chimney as a deliberate concealment. The word concealment hung in the humid air between them. How did no one find them before? Megan's voice broke on the question. The police searched this house in 2001. There were dogs, FBI, everyone looking. They searched for living people, Mrs. Brennan, or recently deceased. They were tracking scents through the house and yard, looking for exit routes, points of entry. No one thought to excavate a sealed chimney. Roth's expression was grim. It's the kind of hiding place that only works because it's so audacious no one considers it. Across the lawn, Derek stood with his arms crossed, watching the house like it might rear up and strike him. 2 uniformed officers flanked him, their presence protective but distant. Mills' radio crackled. "Detective, ME's office on line 2. She stepped away, phone to her ear, leaving Roth and Megan in a pocket of quiet amid the chaos. "I've worked recoveries for 18 years, Roth said, his voice softer now. "I can tell you the Hartwell case was legendary in forensic circles. The family that vanished from a locked room. I was at a conference in 2015 where it was used as a teaching example of investigative limitations." He looked at the house, its windows blazing with portable lights the team had set up inside. "I never thought I'd be standing here doing the recovery. What happens now? Autopsy, toxicology if there's sufficient tissue, dental confirmation of identity, and a comprehensive review of the original case file. We'll be looking for how this was done, when, and by whom." He stood, brushing off his knees. "And we'll be looking at the chimney structure itself, access points, concealment methods, anything that explains how someone managed this." Mills returned, her face unreadable. "Mrs. Brennan, I just spoke with the chief medical examiner. He's requesting the original case detective be brought in for consultation. James Voss. Do you know that name?" Megan did. She'd read his interviews in the archived newspaper coverage. "He retired, didn't he?" 6 years ago. But he lives in Davenport, and this was his case. He deserves to know." Mills glanced at her watch. "It's almost 5. I'm going to have an officer drive you and your husband to Bettendorf, get you settled. We'll need those formal statements by this afternoon." "Okay. One more thing." Mills's tone sharpened with professional focus. "Did you notice anything unusual about the chimney before today? Any sounds, drafts, disturbances?" Megan thought back through the 14 months they'd lived here. "Sometimes I thought I heard sounds. Scratching, maybe. Derek said it was birds or squirrels in the walls. Anything else?" "The basement." Megan's breath caught as the memory surfaced. "About 2 months after we moved in, I went down to get Christmas decorations. There were shelves pulled away from the wall, like someone had been searching behind them. Derek swore he'd been organizing, but the way he said it, she met Mills's eyes. I thought he was lying about forgetting. Now I think maybe someone else had been down there." Roth and Mills exchanged another weighted look. "We'll need to see that basement," Roth said. They helped Megan from the patrol car. Her legs felt unsteady, and the pre-dawn air was already thick with gathering heat. The neighborhood had quieted, but she could see faces in windows, phones recording the scene. By noon, this would be on every news channel. The Hartwell house, which had been a ghost story, was about to become something far worse. A crime scene with bodies. Derek approached, his expression shuddered. "Car's ready." Megan wanted to reach for him, to bridge the chasm that had opened between them in the last 6 hours. But she didn't. Instead, she looked back at the house one final time. The chimney rose above the roofline, brick darkened by a century of weather, crowned by the ornate cap that had seemed so charming when they'd first toured the property. Now it looked like a grave marker, which, she supposed, it had been all along. Inside that chimney, the Hartwell family had waited in the dark. David, who'd called 911 with a trembling voice. Michelle, who'd taught 3rd grade and run book fairs. Emma, with her drawings. The 6-year-old twins, whose names Megan had read but couldn't remember now, her mind too full of rocket ship pajamas and small bones tumbling into the fireplace. They'd been here all along, 35 feet from where police had stood, where neighbors had gathered, where for sale signs had gone up and come down 3 times. The house had kept its secret, and now that secret was out. lying in body bags in a vehicle that would carry them away from the only home they'd ever known. The stark white walls of the Davenport Police Department's community room seemed to press inward, despite the August heat bleeding through every window. Susan Warwick sat in the second row, her hands folded in her lap with the careful precision of someone who'd spent 24 years learning to hold herself together. Around her, reporters shuffled, cameras adjusted on tripods, and the low murmur of speculation filled the spaces between metal folding chairs. She'd known this day was coming. Detective Mills had called her 3 days ago, her voice gentle but professional. "We're ready to make a public statement, Susan. I wanted you to hear it from me first. But hearing it privately and witnessing the machinery of official acknowledgement were different animals entirely." The clock on the wall read 2:57 p.m. 3 minutes until her sister's death became national news again. Susan's fingers found the small silver cross at her neck, a gift from Michelle on her 30th birthday. 28 years ago, when the world still made sense and sisters could give each other jewelry without the weight of grief attached. She'd worn it every day since the disappearance, a talisman against the worst possibilities. Now those possibilities had been confirmed, excavated from a chimney in pieces. At exactly 3 o'clock, Police Chief Raymond Holder stepped to the podium, flanked by Detective Mills and an FBI liaison whose name Susan had already forgotten. The room fell silent with the abruptness of a held breath. "On July 17th of this year," Holder began, his voice carrying the practiced steadiness of bad news delivered professionally, "human remains were discovered in the chimney of a private residence at 1847 Kirkwood Boulevard. After extensive forensic analysis, we can now confirm those remains belong to the Hartwell family. David Marcus Hartwell, Michelle Ann Hartwell, and their 3 children, Emma, Cole, and Charlotte." The room erupted. Cameras flashed despite the prohibition. A reporter in the front row stood, shouting a question that was swallowed by a dozen others. Susan sat motionless, watching the chaos through a distant haze. She'd imagined this moment so many different ways over the years. Sometimes they were found alive, hiding in witness protection, or recovering from amnesia in some coastal town. Sometimes they were found in shallow graves, victims of a random intruder. Never once had she imagined them folded into the architecture of their own home, waiting in the dark while search dogs passed beneath them. Holder raised his hands, calling for quiet. "We'll take questions at the end. Right now I'm going to turn this over to medical examiner Dr. Philip Roth, who can speak to the preliminary findings." Dr. Roth adjusted his glasses and approached the microphone with the uncomfortable air of a man more at ease with the dead than the living. He was perhaps 60, with the careful posture of someone who spent long hours bent over examination tables. "The remains were discovered in an advanced state of decomposition," he said, his clinical tone a stark contrast to Holder's diplomatic warmth. "However, the chimney environment, specifically its dry, oxygen-poor conditions, resulted in partial mummification that preserved enough tissue for analysis." Susan closed her eyes. Partial mummification. They were reducing Emma's freckled smile to technical terms. "Preliminary examination revealed no evidence of traumatic injury," Roth continued. "No bullet wounds, no skeletal fractures consistent with blunt force trauma, no defensive wounds. However, toxicological analysis of bone marrow and remaining soft tissue revealed the presence of flunitrazepam, more commonly known as Rohypnol, at levels consistent with fatal overdose." The room had gone quiet again, but it was a different silence now. The kind that came with understanding dawning. "Based on decomposition patterns, ambient temperature data from September 2001, and the chemical breakdown of the sedative, we estimate time of death between 11:30 and 11:50 p.m. on September 14, 2001. Roth paused, letting the implications settle. "This means the family was deceased or dying during the time frame of the 911 call, placed at 11:43 p.m. More chaos. More shouted questions. Susan heard fragments. Staged? Murder-suicide? Who gave them the drugs? But couldn't make herself care about the answers yet. Her mind had snagged on a single, terrible detail. Emma would have been 9 years, 2 months, and 6 days old when she died. The twins, 6 years and 11 months. They'd been babies, really. Charlotte had just lost her first tooth that summer. Michelle had sent Susan a photo of the gap-toothed grin. Detective Mills stepped forward, her presence commanding enough that the room gradually settled. Susan had come to respect Mills over the past weeks. She had her grandmother's no-nonsense directness, tempered with genuine compassion. "We want to be clear about what the evidence tells us," Mills said. This was not a murder-suicide. David Hartwell did not harm his family. The toxicology reports, the positioning of the remains, and additional evidence we've recovered all point to the involvement of an outside perpetrator who systematically drugged the family, staged the 911 call, and concealed their bodies in a location that would evade detection. Who? A reporter from the Des Moines Register was on his feet. "Do you have a suspect?" Mill's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "We're pursuing several active leads related to individuals who had access to the Hartwell home in the weeks prior to their disappearance. That's all I can say at this time." But Susan knew more. Mills had spent an hour with her yesterday, walking her through what they'd discovered. The $15,000 withdrawal, the old college roommate, the search for Eric Raines that led to a dead man's apartment in Montana. Mills had been careful, professional, but Susan had seen the certainty in her eyes. They knew who did this. They just needed to prove it. The press conference continued for another 20 minutes. Holder fielded questions about the original investigation's failures with diplomatic deflection. Roth clarified technical details about decomposition rates and toxicology procedures. Mills stonewalled inquiries about suspects with the practiced ease of someone who'd been a detective for 15 years. Susan waited until the room began to empty, reporters streaming out to file their stories, cameras being broken down and hauled away. Mills caught her eye and made her way over, settling into the chair beside her. "You okay?" Mills asked quietly. Susan laughed, a single sharp sound without humor. "I don't think I'll ever be okay again. But I'm upright, if that's what you're asking." "The FBI lab sent over the enhanced audio analysis this morning," Mills said. "I wanted you to hear it from me before we brief the media tomorrow." They isolated a second voice on the 911 recording. Someone was in that room with David, directing what he said. Susan's hands tightened on the cross until the edges bit into her palm. "Eric Raines. We can't confirm that yet. The audio quality isn't good enough for voice identification, but—" Mills hesitated. "Yes, I believe it was him." "When can I bury them?" The question came out harder than Susan intended, but she was too tired to soften it. "When can I give them an actual funeral instead of this circus?" "Dr. Roth says he'll release the remains next week, once all the forensic documentation is complete. The state crime lab wants to do some additional testing on tissue samples, but that won't require retaining the bodies." Susan nodded, not trusting herself to speak. A funeral. After 24 years of vigils and memorials and empty coffins, she would finally have something to bury. 4 somethings. The image threatened to crack the composure she'd maintained through the press conference. "Susan." Mill's voice was gentle. "I know this is unbearable, but we're going to find out exactly what happened in that house, and we're going to make sure everyone knows David didn't hurt his family, that he died trying to protect them. He was always so afraid," Susan said, her voice distant. "After that robbery when he was a kid, he used to tell Michelle he just wanted to keep them all safe. And in the end—" She couldn't finish the sentence. Mills squeezed her shoulder once, then stood. "We have investigators flying to Missoula tomorrow to go through Raines' stored belongings. I'll call you as soon as we know anything concrete." Susan watched the detective walk away, then sat alone in the emptying room for a long time, running the cross chain through her fingers like a rosary. Outside, the Iowa summer pressed against the windows, thick and humid and alive. Inside, the air conditioning cycled on with a mechanical hum. Somewhere in the building, phones were ringing, files were being opened and closed. The bureaucracy of death ground forward. She thought about Michelle, who'd always been the practical one, the problem solver, the woman who could organize a school book fair for 200 students without breaking a sweat. Michelle would have appreciated the irony that after all the searching, all the theories and psychics and amateur detectives with their elaborate conspiracies, the answer had been waiting in the most obvious place imaginable. Home. They'd been home all along. Susan stood slowly, her knees protesting. 64 felt ancient today. She gathered her purse and walked out through the building's side exit, avoiding the reporters still lingering near the front entrance. Her car sat baking in the lot, the steering wheel too hot to touch when she finally opened the door. The drive to Roosevelt Elementary took 12 minutes. School wouldn't start again for another 3 weeks, but the building stood solid and familiar against the blue August sky. Susan parked in the visitor lot and walked to the memorial bench they'd installed in Michelle's honor back in 2003. The brass plaque was weathered now, the inscription barely legible. In memory of Michelle Hartwell, beloved teacher, sister, mother. She sat, facing the empty playground where Emma and the twins used to play while waiting for their mother to finish grading papers. The swings moved slightly in the breeze, creating the familiar metallic squeak that every school playground possessed. "They found you," Susan said quietly to the wind, to the empty swings, to the sister who would never answer. "You were there the whole time, and we missed you. We looked everywhere except up." A car passed on the street behind her. A bird landed on the monkey bars, then flew away. The world continued its indifferent rotation, unconcerned with the small tragedies that had consumed her family. The FBI regional office in Quantico hummed with the sterile energy of a government building designed to process horrors. Detective Sarah Mills sat in a windowless conference room on the 3rd floor, watching snow fall on distant Virginia hills through a narrow pane of glass. Beside her, retired Detective James Voss shifted in his chair, fingers drumming against the faux wood table. Neither had slept properly since boarding the plane in Des Moines 2 days ago. The journey here had been Mills's idea. The toxicology results and the Chimney discovery had answered what happened to the Hartwells, but not who. Not definitively. The enhanced audio analysis promised answers that 2001 technology couldn't deliver. 24 years of degraded magnetic tape, of background noise and dispatcher chatter, would be stripped away layer by layer until only the truth remained. Special Agent Carolyn Pruitt entered carrying a laptop and a set of over-ear headphones. She was younger than Mills expected, maybe 35, with the efficient demeanor of someone who spent more time with machines than people. "Detectives," Pruitt said, settling into a chair, "I've spent the last 48 hours with your 911 recording. What we've recovered is significant." She opened the laptop, angling it so all three could see the waveform displayed across the screen. Peaks and valleys of sound frozen in digital amber. Mills recognized the dispatcher's voice, the ID number logged at 11:43 p.m. on September 14, 2001. Teresa Moss, who'd retired years ago but still attended every community vigil for missing persons, had made that recording. In 2001, analog technology could only do so much with background noise, Pruitt explained. The human ear fills in gaps, makes assumptions. Your dispatcher heard David Hartwell reporting an intruder. Your responding officers heard a terrified man protecting his family. But the tape captured more than human perception registered. She clicked a key, isolating a segment. This is the raw recording, 30 seconds in. David Hartwell's voice emerged from the speakers, tight with controlled panic, exactly as Mills remembered from the transcript. "Someone's in my house. I can hear them downstairs." Voss leaned forward, the lines around his eyes deepening. Mills knew he'd listened to this recording hundreds of times over the years, searching for something he'd always sensed but never quite grasped. "Now," Pruitt said, "I'm going to apply a series of filters. First, I'll remove the ambient hum, electrical interference from 2001 phone lines. Then I'll reduce the tape hiss using spectral analysis. Finally, I'll boost the low-frequency range, where human speech typically registers below normal conversation levels. Her fingers moved across the keyboard. The waveform shifted, contracted, revealed new contours. When she played the recording again, Mills felt the temperature in the room drop. David's voice came through clearer, stripped of static. "Someone's in my house." But underneath, soft, patient, almost gentle, another voice threaded through the silence. "Good." Mills's breath caught. Pruitt continued the playback. David again. "I can hear them downstairs." And beneath it, that second voice coaching. "Now say you hear them downstairs." The words matched David's, but preceded them by a fraction of a second. Someone had been feeding him lines. Someone who knew exactly what needed to be said to make the call sound authentic, to establish the intruder narrative, to create the 12-minute window that would allow 4 bodies to vanish. Voss made a sound low in his throat, pain and vindication mixed together. Jesus Christ. Pruitt played another segment, 2 minutes into the call. David's whisper, "I think they're leaving, the back door." And underneath, "Tell them the back door. I need you to sound relieved." The voice was male, American, with the flat vowels of the upper Midwest. Young, 30s, maybe early 40s. It carried no urgency, no fear. Only a director's calm focus on the performance he was orchestrating. "Can you identify the second speaker?" Mills asked, though she already suspected the answer. "Not definitively from audio alone," Pruitt said, "but I can tell you several things. The speaker is close to David Hartwell, within 2 feet based on the mic proximity. He's relaxed, breathing normally. There's no stress in his vocal patterns, and here," she isolated another segment, "you can hear him moving, fabric against fabric. He's standing behind or beside David, likely with some kind of physical contact to maintain control." Mills thought of the toxicology report. Massive levels of rohypnol in all 4 victims. Michelle and the children would have been unconscious or already dead while this recording was made. David had been forced to perform, to narrate his family's destruction, perhaps with a weapon pressed to his spine or a hand gripping his shoulder. The cruelty of it lodged in Mills's chest like a shard of ice. "Is there anything else?" Voss asked. "Any other voices, sounds, anything that tells us who this bastard was?" Pruitt advanced the recording to the 3-minute mark. "This is where it gets interesting. David stops talking for about 20 seconds. The dispatcher is asking him to stay on the line. During that silence, I found something." She played a segment of what should have been empty air. At first, Mills heard nothing. Then, faint as a ghost, came the sound of breathing. Not David's shallow, frightened gasps, but someone else's. Steady, measured. And underneath that, barely perceptible, the whisper of fabric, footsteps padding across carpet. "He's moving around the room," Pruitt said. "Checking something, maybe. And then, listen." A soft mechanical click, a familiar sound Mills couldn't immediately place. "That's a camera," Voss said suddenly. "A film camera, the shutter." Pruitt nodded. "That's my assessment too. Single lens reflex, probably 35 millimeters. He was documenting the scene." The implications settled over the room like fallout. This wasn't panic, wasn't improvisation. The man in that bedroom with David Hartwell had been calm enough to take photographs while 4 people died around him. "Can you isolate the voice further?" Mills asked. "Clean it up enough for comparison if we get a suspect?" "Already done." Pruitt pulled up another file. "I've created a clean sample of the unknown speaker, removed all overlapping audio. If you can provide a voice recording from a suspect, interview tape, voicemail, anything, we can run a comparative analysis. The speech patterns, the regional accent markers, they're all here." Mills thought of Eric Rains, dead 6 years in Missoula. The name had surfaced in the original 2001 file, David's college roommate, interviewed briefly, dismissed as a peripheral figure. The $15,000 withdrawal in August 2001 that no one had ever fully explained. The neighbor's vague memory of someone staying at the Hartwell house that summer. If Rains had recorded a voicemail, left a phone message somewhere, they could match it to the voice on this tape. Even dead men could be held accountable, their names attached to their crimes. "We need everything you've got," Mills said. "Full analysis, written report, certified for court presentation." "You're building a case against someone who's already dead?" Pruitt asked. "We're building a case for the truth," Voss said quietly, "so the family can know. So this doesn't just disappear into a file drawer marked unsolved." Pruitt nodded, understanding in her expression. She'd worked enough cases to know that justice wasn't always about convictions. Sometimes it was about giving names to monsters, about letting the dead rest with their stories finally told. "I'll have everything ready by tomorrow," she said. Mills stood, legs stiff from sitting. Through the window, the Virginia snow had intensified, coating the distant hills in white. She thought of Iowa, of the Hartwell house that had held its terrible secret for 24 years, of Susan Warwick, who deserved more than theories and suppositions. "One more thing," Pruitt said as they reached the door. "Right at the end of the call, after David tells the dispatcher he thinks the intruder is leaving, there's something else." She played the final 10 seconds, David's voice, shakier now. "Please hurry." And underneath, barely a whisper, the other man's voice. "Good boy." The words hung in the air like a curse, not a threat, not a command, just a calm, almost affectionate acknowledgement. The intimacy of it was somehow worse than violence. Mills and Voss walked out into the fluorescent hallway without speaking. The recording played on a loop in Mills's mind, that patient, directing voice, those careful instructions. She'd worked homicides for 15 years, seen crime scenes that would haunt her until she died. But this was different. This was a man who'd turned a father into the narrator of his own family's annihilation, who'd staged a perfect disappearance, and then watched from the shadows as police searched everywhere but up. On the flight back to Des Moines, Voss finally broke the silence. "We need to find Rains's voice. Recorded somewhere. Has to be. I've got people checking Montana," Mills said. "Phone company records, workplace recordings if he had a job, anything." "He wanted credit for this," Voss said, staring out the window at clouds. "That's why he stayed in the room, why he directed the call. He could have just killed them quietly and left, but he needed David to perform. He needed that recording to exist." Mills understood. The 911 call was part of the crime, not evidence left accidentally, but a deliberate component of the vanishing. A piece of theater that would puzzle investigators, that would create the mystery Rains wanted the world to contemplate. For 24 years, it had worked exactly as he'd planned. But technology had caught up. The voice that had hidden in static and background noise for more than 2 decades was finally exposed. And somewhere in the accumulated detritus of Eric Rains's life, if he was indeed their man, there would be another recording, another sample, another chance to match the monster to his crime. The plane descended through winter clouds toward Iowa. Mills closed her eyes and let the steady drone carry her toward answers. The Davenport Police Department conference room felt smaller than Detective Sarah Mills remembered. 20 officers had crowded into a space meant for 12, all of them drawn by the same grim magnetism that had pulled her from sleep at 4 a.m. Retired Detective James Voss sat at the head table beside her, his weathered hands wrapped around a paper coffee cup, his eyes fixed on the whiteboard where someone had taped a timeline spanning 2 decades. Mills cleared her throat. "We're looking for a ghost." The room quieted. Even the HVAC system seemed to hold its breath. "Our primary suspect is Eric Nolan Rains, born 1969. Mills tapped the board where a grainy DMV photo stared back at them, a man with blue eyes and a forgettable face. College roommate of David Hartwell. According to the original case file, he was interviewed briefly in October 2001. Told investigators he hadn't seen David in years. Detectives moved on. Voss shifted in his seat. Mills could see the weight settling on his shoulders, the accumulation of all the questions he'd failed to ask. "We now know that was a lie," Mills continued. "Neighbors from 2001 mentioned David had a friend staying with him that summer. One of them, Dolores Chen, specifically recalled August. Thin man with a nice smile, she told our canvassers back then. Helped David with yard work." She pulled up a photograph on the projector. A community block party, kids with popsicles, neighbors clustered around picnic tables. This was taken August 26, 2001, Roosevelt Elementary's annual cookout. The Hartwells attended every year. Mills used a laser pointer to highlight the background. Behind David Hartwell, who was grinning beside the grill with a spatula in hand, stood another man. Partially obscured by a tree, facing away from the camera, but visible in three-quarter profile. Facial recognition gives us an 87% match to Eric Raines's 1998 driver's license photo. Mills advanced to the next slide, a bank statement. On August 22nd, David withdrew $15,000 in cash from his Nationwide account. Branch manager from 2001 is still working there. She remembered the transaction because David seemed nervous, insisted on cash, and put it in a manila envelope right there at the counter. Voss spoke for the first time, his voice rough. "We followed that withdrawal. Couldn't connect it to anything. Because we were looking for evidence of flight," Mills said gently. "We thought David might be planning to run with his family. We didn't consider he might have been coerced into giving money to someone who had access to his house, his family, his trust." She pulled up the enhanced 911 audio analysis from Quantico. This voice, she played the clip, the low, calm instruction beneath David's whispers, is what we're trying to match. We need samples of Eric Raines speaking, phone messages, interviews, anything recorded. A young detective near the back raised his hand. "You said primary suspect. He's not in custody?" Mills exhaled slowly. "Eric Raines died in 2019, suicide, Missoula, Montana." The room erupted in groans and muttered curses. "He hanged himself in his apartment bathroom," Mills continued over the noise. "Landlord found him 3 days later. Missoula PD investigated, ruled it self-inflicted, no note. His personal effects were cataloged and stored per standard protocol for unclaimed estates. No next of kin came forward." She let that sink in. "Here's the part that matters. Montana law requires personal effects from suicides to be retained for 10 years in case of contested wills or family claims. It's 2025. We're still inside that window." Voss leaned forward. "They still have his belongings?" "Every box. I called the Missoula Evidence Facility yesterday. Raines's stuff has been sitting in a climate-controlled warehouse for 6 years, sealed and undisturbed." Mills couldn't keep the tightness from her voice. "Missoula's being cooperative. They're pulling the boxes now." She advanced to a split-screen image, the Hartwell house in 2001, bright and ordinary, beside a mugshot-style photo from a Montana driver's license. Eric Raines at 50, gaunt and hollow-eyed, nothing like the young man from the block party photo. Raines worked as a building superintendent in Missoula from 2015 until his death. Before that, he drifted. Portland, Tulsa, Denver. Short-term jobs, frequent moves, cash economy. His work history shows gaps that align with unsolved family disappearances in 3 cities. A detective near the window spoke up. "You think he did this before?" "The Portland Marsh family vanished in 1997, Mills said. Parents and 2 kids. Disappeared from their locked house overnight. The Keller family in Tulsa, 1999. Same pattern. Both cases went cold. Both houses had Victorian-era fireplaces with large chimney flues." The room had gone silent again. "Eric Raines lived in Portland from February to November 1997, Mills continued. "He worked for a restoration company that specialized in historic homes. In Tulsa, he was employed by a property management firm with access to vacant houses. He knew structures. He understood chimneys." Voss rubbed his face with both hands. Jesus Christ. Mills pulled up a map with red pins marking Davenport, Portland, and Tulsa. We're coordinating with cold case units in both cities. They're getting warrants to inspect the chimneys of the Marsh and Keller homes. Both properties are currently abandoned, scheduled for demolition. She didn't need to spell out what that meant. If other families were waiting in other chimneys, time was running short. Our immediate priority is Raines's stored effects from Missoula, Mills said. I'm flying out this afternoon with Detective Voss. We're looking for journals, photographs, souvenirs, anything that documents his connection to the Hartwells or his methodology. A veteran detective spoke from the back row. What if there's nothing? What if he was smart enough not to keep records? Mills had considered this through the sleepless hours before dawn. Then we build a circumstantial case. The audio match from Quantico will help. The $15,000 withdrawal. The block party photo. Raines's presence in Davenport in August 2001. His suicide in 2019, which might have been triggered by something. Guilt, fear of discovery, terminal illness. We work with what we have. But she didn't believe that would be necessary. Men like Eric Raines, men who planned meticulously, who hid families in chimneys where police had already searched, who staged 911 calls and locked doors from the outside. These men needed to document their brilliance. The narcissism required to commit such crimes demanded an audience, even if that audience was only a future version of themselves, reviewing their own perfection. There's one more thing, Mills said. She pulled up a final photograph. The Hartwell house's basement, circa 2001, captured during the original investigation. Boxes and shelves lined the concrete walls. Raines's journal, if he kept one, might reference how he accessed the chimney flue. There would have been a clean-out door, standard in older homes, probably painted over or concealed. The original search teams didn't find it. We weren't looking in the right place, Voss said quietly. We were searching for living people or signs of struggle, not architectural features. Mills nodded. If we can match Raines's voice to the 911 recording, we establish he was in that bedroom. If we find documentation in his effects, we confirm premeditation. If we locate the basement clean-out door he used, we prove methodology. 3 points of evidence. 3 angles of attack. She clicked off the projector. Morning light filtered through the blinds, striping the conference room in bars of pale gold. The Hartwell family deserves answers, Mills said. Susan Warwick deserves to know who did this and why. We're 24 years behind, but we're not stopping until we have both. By noon, Mills and Voss were at the Des Moines International Airport, boarding a flight to Missoula via Minneapolis. Voss carried a battered leather briefcase containing copies of the original case file, thousands of pages he'd memorized over 2 decades of obsessive review. Mills had her laptop, loaded with the enhanced audio analysis and facial recognition reports. They didn't speak much during the layover in Minneapolis. Mills bought coffee they didn't drink. Voss stood at the terminal windows, watching planes taxi on the distant runways. I should have pushed harder on Raines in 2001, he said finally. Mills joined him at the window. You interviewed dozens of people. The FBI interviewed dozens more. Raines lied convincingly enough to fool everyone. I was so focused on the locked room, Voss continued. How they got out. I never seriously considered they might not have gotten out at all. That they could be right there, dead already, while we searched. He turned to face her. The popcorn was warm, Sarah. Warm. They were alive when it was made. Raines must have drugged it right after, then waited for them to collapse. We'll prove it, Mills said. One way or another. The flight to Missoula took 3 hours. Mills used the time to review the Montana State Police report on Raines's suicide. It was brief and unremarkable. 50-year-old male found deceased in bathroom, rope ligature, chair kicked away, no signs of struggle. Apartment was sparsely furnished, rent current, no obvious financial distress. Employer described him as quiet, reliable, kept to himself. The landlord's statement caught her attention. Eric was a good tenant, paid on time, never complained. Only weird thing was he kept a padlock on the basement storage unit. Said he had valuable family heirlooms down there. I never saw what was inside. Mills underlined that passage 3 times. They landed in Missoula at 4 p.m, Mountain Time. The city sprawled in a valley between mountain ranges, the Clark Fork River cutting through its heart. A detective from the Missoula Police Department met them at the airport and drove them north to the county evidence facility. He was a broad-shouldered man in his 30s who introduced himself as Detective Luis Mendez and briefed them on procedures. Boxes would be brought out one at a time, each checked against the inventory, photographed, and logged before being transferred to their custody under Montana's evidence protocols. The warehouse smelled faintly of disinfectant and cedar. Rows of metal shelving held hundreds of sealed cartons. Mills watched as 2 techs wheeled a pallet toward them and felt, for the first time since the conference room, a cold tighten of hope. Voss uncapped a pen and set his briefcase on the rolling table. When the first box number was read aloud, Rains, Eric Nolan, he breathed, "Let's see what he kept." The twin-engine bombardier bumped through low clouds on its descent into Missoula, the mountains below still capped with July snow. Sarah Mills pressed her forehead against the window, watching Montana unfold beneath her, a landscape so different from Iowa's gentle rolls that it felt like stepping into another country entirely. James Voss sat across the narrow aisle. Eric Raines's 2001 booking photo spread across his tray table beside a legal pad covered in his precise handwriting. He'd been taking notes since Des Moines, reconstructing timelines, listing questions they'd need answered. "You okay?" Mills asked. Voss looked up, his face drawn. "Just thinking about Susan. She's waited 24 years for answers. We're about to open boxes from a dead man's apartment, hoping he documented his own crimes." "The journal's in there," Mills said. "I can feel it." "Your gut's been right so far." Voss returned to his notes. "But even if we find documentation, even if we prove every detail, Raines is 6 years dead. There's no trial, no accountability, just confirmation of what already happened." The plane touched down hard, Montana welcoming them with characteristic bluntness. Detective Luis Mendez met them at the airport, a wiry man in his 50s with weathered hands and careful eyes. "Your timing's good," he said, loading their bags into his unmarked Explorer. "County was about to auction Raines's effects next month, unclaimed property disposal." "How much is there?" Mills asked. 4 boxes, not much for a life." Mendez pulled onto Reserve Street, heading north. Raines wasn't exactly living large when he died. Studio apartment above a laundromat on Brooks. Super found him 3 days after. Carbon monoxide from a jury-rigged setup. ME ruled it suicide, no question. Voss leaned forward. "Any note?" "Nothing. Empty apartment, empty life." Mendez glanced in the rear view. "Your call got us digging. Raines worked maintenance at a property management company, had access to maybe 40 buildings around Missoula. Old Victorians, historic places. We're checking tenant records now, cross-referencing missing persons." The Missoula County Evidence Facility occupied a low cinder block building behind the courthouse, its windowless walls radiating stored heat. Inside, the temperature dropped 20 degrees. A clerk led them past rows of metal shelving to a corner table where 4 bankers' boxes waited, each labeled with a case number and Raines's name. Mills photographed the seals before breaking them. The first box contained clothing, worn t-shirts, jeans with frayed hems, a winter coat that smelled of cigarettes and loneliness. Nothing personal, nothing distinctive. The possessions of a man who'd stopped caring about appearances. The second held books, true crime paperbacks, their spines cracked from multiple readings. Helter Skelter, The Stranger Beside Me, In Cold Blood. Mills flipped through each one, checking margins for notes. Clean pages, but the selection itself was a confession of interest. Voss opened the third box and went still. Sarah. Inside, wrapped in a plastic shopping bag, was a photo album. Not the kind you bought at Target, but an older style with black construction paper pages and corner mounts for prints. Voss lifted it carefully, set it on the table, and opened the cover. The first photograph showed David Hartwell at maybe 20 years old, standing outside a brick dormitory with his arm around a younger, harder version of Eric Rains. Both wore college sweatshirts. Both were smiling. Mills leaned over Voss's shoulder as he turned pages. More college photos. Parties, football games, study sessions in cluttered dorm rooms. David and Eric, roommates and friends, their whole lives ahead of them. Then the tone shifted. Halfway through the album, the photos changed. David's wedding to Michelle. But these weren't official pictures. They were distant telephoto shots taken from across a parking lot. David in a tuxedo, unaware he was being documented. Emma as a baby, photographed through a window. The twins on their first birthday. The image snapped from the Hartwells' backyard. Jesus, Mendez breathed. The surveillance continued, chronological and obsessive. David coaching Little League. Eric in the bleachers, camera ready. Michelle at the grocery store. The children at the library. Years of watching, cataloging, collecting proof of the life David had built while Eric had none. The final page held a single photograph. The Hartwell family on their front porch, August 2001. David had his arm around Michelle. Emma held Charlotte's hand while Cole made bunny ears behind his father's head. Normal, happy, unaware. Someone had written across the bottom in neat script. Before. There's more, Voss said quietly. He reached into the box and withdrew a second album, this one smaller, black leather, locked with a tiny brass clasp. The lock had corroded in 6 years of Montana humidity, and it broke when Mills touched it. She opened the cover. The first page held a single sheet of lined paper, the handwriting immediately familiar from the photo captions. A title page. The Vanishing. A documentation. Beneath it, a date. September 14, 2001. And below that, they'll never look up. Mills's hands trembled as she turned the page. Voss stood beside her, one hand braced on the table. Even Mendez, who'd seen decades of human darkness, leaned closer. The journal began with a list. Materials acquired. Rohypnol, veterinary source, 30 tablets. Latex gloves, unused, 3 boxes. Plastic sheeting, 10 by 12, contractor grade. 35mm camera plus flash, documentation. Audio recorder, backup. The clinical precision continued through pages of planning. Rains had mapped the Hartwell house room by room, including measurements of the chimney. Flue, 8 feet wide at the base, narrowing to 4 feet at the damper, 35 feet to the cap. He'd sketched the basement layout, marking the location of a clean-out door hidden behind storage shelves, painted over decades ago but still functional. He'd calculated sedative dosages by body weight, practiced his timing, his movements, tested the 911 system's response time by calling in false alarms from payphones, then watching how long officers took to arrive. 12 minutes, average. Enough time, if you knew what you were doing. One passage made Mills close her eyes. August 30th, baseline established. Family accepts drugged popcorn without suspicion. Mild sedative dose, 0.5 milligrams Rohypnol per serving. Produces drowsiness within 20 minutes. Emma and the twins sleep through the night in parents' bed. Michelle attributes it to busy day. David suspects nothing. Trust is the perfect weapon. Voss turned another page. His voice was hoarse. He practiced on them. The entries continued, each one methodical, devoid of emotion. Rains described his presence in the house during late August like a scientist documenting an experiment. Where David kept his tools. When Michelle took her evening shower. Which floorboards creaked. The children's bedtime routines. He'd learned them, studied them, prepared. The entry for September 14th filled 3 pages. 7:15 p.m. Prepared evening meal. Rohypnol crushed into popcorn butter, concentration 4 milligrams per tablespoon. Lethal dose for children, near lethal for adults. Family unaware. 8:40 p.m. First signs of sedation. Twins drowsy. Emma complaining of dizziness. David suggests early bedtime, carries children upstairs. Michelle follows. Perfect. 9:20 p.m. Entire family in master bedroom, all sedated but conscious. David beginning to panic, realizes something wrong but motor function compromised. I enter the room. He sees me. Recognition. Betrayal. Beautiful. Mills had to stop reading. The temperature in the evidence room felt arctic, but sweat traced her spine. Voss continued for her, his voice mechanical. 9:45 p.m. Michelle and children fully unconscious, respiratory depression evident. David still partially aware. I position him on the bed, place phone in his hand, coach him through the 911 script. He's crying. He knows his family is dying. He knows I did this. But his body won't obey him anymore, only his voice. And I control that now. 10:30 p.m. David deceased, respiratory failure. Photographed the scene. 4 bodies, peaceful arrangement. The family that excluded me, finally, together, forever. The next section detailed the concealment with the same bloodless precision. How Rains had wrapped each body in plastic sheeting, carried them, one by one, to the basement. Michelle first, lightest of the adults. Then the children, heartbreakingly small bundles. Finally David, requiring 2 trips down the narrow stairs. He'd opened the clean-out door behind the storage shelves, the one he'd discovered during his August stay while helping David organize the basement. Accessed the chimney shaft from below. Positioned the bodies vertically in the flue, Michelle and David supporting the children between them, a grotesque family embrace that would hold them upright as decomposition and time did their work. The chimney is perfect, one passage read. Brick construction, excellent airflow through the cap, dry environment, natural mummification likely. And the psychological poetry, they're in the heart of their home, in the structure that warms a family, preserved like specimens in the dark. After sealing the clean-out door and repositioning the shelves, Rains had returned upstairs. Jimmied the back door from inside to simulate forced entry, scattered the kitchen drawer's contents, left the movie playing, the popcorn bowl on the coffee table, Michelle's glasses on the sofa arm. He'd locked the master bedroom from outside using a wire technique he'd practiced, then withdrawn the wire under the door gap. Wiped surfaces, checked the scene, left through the back door at 11:41 p.m. 2 minutes before David's 911 call would timestamp into the system, already recorded on Rains's audio backup. The final entry was dated September 15th. The basement of the Hartwell house smells like mildew and forgotten years. Detective Sarah Mills descends the wooden stairs first, her flashlight cutting through the dust motes that hang suspended in the air like tiny ghosts. Behind her, James Voss moves more carefully, one hand on the railing, the other clutching the photocopied pages of Eric Rains's journal. Behind them, 2 forensic technicians carry equipment that clanks softly in the silence. The house feels different now, lighter somehow, as if the extraction of the bodies has released some invisible pressure. But down here, in the foundation where no sunlight has penetrated in decades, the weight of history remains oppressive. He said behind the water heater, Mills says, scanning the basement with her light. Behind the storage shelves where they kept Christmas decorations. The basement is exactly as it was in 2001, cluttered, cramped, filled with the accumulated debris of family life. Cardboard boxes sag against one wall, their labels faded to illegibility. An ancient washer and dryer stand sentinel in one corner. The water heater, a squat cylinder wrapped in peeling insulation, sits near the far wall. Voss can picture it perfectly. David Hartwell descending these same stairs, arms full of holiday decorations, never noticing that someone else had been down here. Mapping, planning, finding the perfect hiding place. They move the shelves first. The metal frame scrapes against concrete as the technicians pull it away from the wall, revealing a stretch of painted cinder block that looks identical to the rest of the basement. But when Mills runs her hand along the surface, she feels it. A vertical seam, barely visible beneath layers of old paint. "Here," she says. One of the technicians produces a utility knife and begins scoring the paint along the seam. The blade makes a soft scratching sound. Paint chips fall away in curls, revealing the outline of a door approximately 3 feet high and 2 feet wide. It's been painted over so many times that the edges have nearly disappeared. Voss watches from a few steps back, his throat tight. In his mind, he's replaying every search of this house in 2001. 3 complete sweeps by trained officers, FBI specialists with infrared cameras, cadaver dogs that walked within feet of this very wall. They'd all missed it. The original blueprints from 1923 show a clean-out access, one of the technicians says, consulting a tablet. Standard for chimneys this size, but it was painted over sometime in the 50s, maybe earlier. Homeowners probably didn't even know it was here. But Eric Raines knew. He'd studied the house like a surgeon studies anatomy, finding the one hidden passage that could serve his purpose. The technician works a crowbar into the seam. For a moment, nothing happens. Then, with a crack that echoes through the basement, the door gives way. It swings outward, hinges screaming from decades of disuse. Behind it, darkness. Mills shines her flashlight into the opening. The beam disappears into a vertical shaft, brick-lined and ancient. The chimney flue. From here it rises 35 feet to the roof, a perfect hiding place for anything, or anyone small enough to fit. The smell that emerges is faint but unmistakable. Old death. The ghost of decomposition that the heat wave upstairs had finally released after 24 years. "My God," Voss whispers. "We walked past this a dozen times." Mills kneels at the opening, examining the frame. He repainted it afterward. See? This paint is newer than the wall around it. Not by much, maybe a few days, but enough that we would have missed it in 2001. She pulls out her phone and photographs the opening from multiple angles. Then she steps back so the forensic team can begin their work. They'll need to document everything, collect samples, confirm what the entire investigation already knows to be true. Voss moves to a dusty workbench along the opposite wall and sits heavily on a stool. He pulls Raines's journal from his jacket and opens it to the marked page. The handwriting is neat, almost elegant. September 15th, 2001, 3:47 a.m. The hardest part was the positioning. David first, then Michelle beside him. The children I placed in front, facing their parents, so the family stays together, even in death. It took nearly 2 hours to arrange them properly in the shaft. I used the basement access, the beautiful, forgotten door that David never knew existed in his own home. Each body wrapped in plastic sheeting from the hardware store on Locust Street. Each one lifted, maneuvered, secured. The twins were lightest. Emma fought the sedative longer than the others. I had to give her a second dose. By the time I positioned her, rigor was beginning. I photographed the work, 12 exposures on my Pentax, documenting the family in their eternal home. Someday, someone will appreciate the artistry. When the last body was in place, I climbed out through the basement access and resealed the door. 3 coats of Benjamin Moore Navajo white, applied carefully to match the surrounding wall. The paint was still tacky when I left at 5:30 a.m., but it would be dry by the time any investigators arrived. They'll search everywhere. They'll call in specialists and volunteers and bring dogs and cameras, but they'll never look up. People never do. Voss closes the journal. His hands are shaking. "Detective?" Mills approaches, her voice gentle. "The team is ready to do a final sweep of the shaft. Make sure we didn't miss any evidence when we extracted the bodies." "Go ahead." She hesitates. "You okay?" "I stood in this basement on September 16th, 2001, Voss says. "Right over there, by those shelves. I was looking for anything unusual. Disturbed earth, loose boards, hidden compartments. I touched that wall. You couldn't have known. The popcorn was still warm when we arrived." He continues, as if she hasn't spoken. "That meant they'd been alive 30 minutes before we got there. Maybe less. If we'd searched faster, found this door that first night." He doesn't finish. "They were already dead," Mills says firmly. "The ME confirmed it. The sedative levels were massive. Even if you'd found this door in the first hour, they would already have been gone. It should be comforting. It isn't. The forensic team works for another hour, using cameras and lights to examine every inch of the shaft's interior. They find traces of the plastic sheeting Rains mentioned, fragments that had degraded over time. They find fibers from clothing. They find, inexplicably, a child's pink beret, Emma's probably, that had slipped through the wrapping. When they finish, Mills makes the call to the district attorney's office, updating them on the confirmed access point and the physical evidence that corroborates Rains's confession. The case against a dead man grows stronger, though it will never see a courtroom. Before they leave, Voss takes one last look at the opened door. In his mind, he can see Eric Rains working in this basement in the darkest hours of September 15th, carefully painting over his crime, sealing the Hartwell family into their tomb, listening, perhaps, to the sound of police radios upstairs as officers searched futilely for a family that was already lost. "He was right about one thing," Voss says quietly. "We never looked up." Outside, the afternoon sun is blinding after the darkness of the basement. A small crowd has gathered at the police barricade, neighbors, reporters, the morbidly curious. The house has been famous for 2 weeks now, its legend transformed from mystery to horror. In the patrol car, heading back to the station, Mills breaks the silence. "The Journal mentions Portland and Tulsa. Think we'll find others?" "I think we'll find exactly what he wanted us to find," Voss says. "Rains killed himself in 2019. He left those journals in his apartment, knowing they'd eventually be stored, cataloged, preserved. He wanted this discovered. Maybe not the exact timing, but eventually." "Why?" "Because he was right. The perfect crime isn't one that's never solved. It's one where the detective realizes he was standing on top of the answer the whole time and never knew it." Mills drives in silence for several blocks. Then, "Susan Warwick wants to meet with you, tomorrow, if you're available." Voss nods. He owes her that much. He owes her everything. That night, alone in his home office, he writes the final entry in his personal case notes. Not the official report. That will be Mills's job, precise and professional. This is something else. A reckoning. The Hartwell family was murdered on September 14, 2001, by Eric Nolan Rains, who had access to their home and intimate knowledge of their routines. He sedated them with Rohypnol, forced David to place the 911 call while his family died around him, then concealed their bodies in the chimney of their own home through a basement access door we failed to discover. The investigation failed not because of a lack of effort, but because we were looking for living people. Our assumptions shaped our search. We checked the chimney for airflow, for signs someone had climbed out. We never checked if someone could climb in. Eric Rains understood this. He built his perfect crime on the foundation of our reasonable assumptions. And for 8,772 days, he was proven right. The Hartwell case is closed. Justice, such as it is, has been served. But I will carry this failure for whatever days remain to me, as I should. He signs it, dates it, and files it away in a drawer he'll probably never open again. His phone buzzes. A text from Mills. The Portland and Tulsa police departments have confirmed they're inspecting chimneys in houses where families vanished in the late 90s. Early reports suggest structural anomalies in both locations. Voss doesn't reply. He's too tired and the night is too dark. And somewhere in America, there are houses with secrets buried in their bones, waiting for heat waves and time to reveal what was hidden in plain sight all along. The last thing he does before bed is pull up a photograph of the Hartwell family on his phone, stare at their faces until the glow fades, and then set the phone on the nightstand and turn off the light.